Thank you, and thank you, everybody. We do have Dan Held, Johny Dilley. We have Jimmy Sung, Giacomo Zucco, all familiar faces. And we're going to be talking about why Bitcoin is unique. So just to beginning off, Giacomo, simply, why is Bitcoin unique to you?
So I think for two reasons. The first one is that Bitcoin must be unique in order to work. We talked about gold a little bit with Saifedian in his historical review on money. Gold has some characteristics, and only gold has those characteristics. So you cannot replace it easily from a technical, physical point of view. Bitcoin has some characteristics, but they are technically reproducible in an infinite variety. They are not socially reproducible, though. So Bitcoin must be socially unique, must be a Schelling point, because everybody can just clonate Bitcoin and create their own shitcoin. So either Bitcoin, the real Bitcoin, has some social Schelling point, otherwise it's just infinitely reproducible. So the bad news is that Bitcoin must be unique in order to work. And the good news is that Bitcoin is actually unique for some historical and economical and social characteristics. Usually people talk about two characteristics of Bitcoin. One is the immaculate conception. So Bitcoin was created first in a period in which incentives were good. Like nobody was expecting to get Lamborghinis in 2008 from that paper. Nobody was, only very committed people was looking into that project. So it started off in a very immaculate kind of environment, both on the incentives point of view and the OPSEC point of view, because the creator is anonymous. Probably nobody will know what Bitcoin is. To replicate that kind of OPSEC now would be completely impossible. That is not to say nobody will never discover Satoshi. That is to say that nobody, I mean, there is a possibility nobody will discover Satoshi. There is no possibility somebody can pull off that kind of OPSEC now under the heavy scrutiny that crypto scam environment created. And the second, the last one that makes Bitcoin unique is, of course, it's a very abused term, but it's network effect. In product, network effect don't count so much. So you can have Model T and Tesla, you can have General Motors, you can have new products displacing old products, like Facebook and MySpace. At the protocol level, though, so at the low level of infrastructural protocol, network effects works in another way. It's not really the newcomer, but it's actually the first comer, which stays there until there is something 100 times better.
Thanks, Giacomo. Jimmy, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's not so much the network effect. That's sort of an emergent property that comes out of the original thing, which is that it's decentralized digital money. And we have never had that before. We've had centralized digital money and we've had decentralized physical money. Combining the two, Bitcoin is the only asset that's like that. Everyone else has tried, like Giacomo was saying, to create something similar with altcoins and whatnot, but they have not succeeded. Bitcoin is the only one that does that. Now, along with that, there are other things that sort of emerge out of that also make Bitcoin very unique. It has the hardest monetary policy that we have ever seen. And Safeteen's book, The Bitcoin Standard, was very important in that regard because it talked not just about hard and easy money in sort of binary terms, but hard and easy money as like a gradation, right? Like stock to flow ratio, talking about how hard the money was. And Bitcoin is harder money than anything we've ever seen before. And that is extremely unique. And that is that's something that everyone will realize as the economic laws sort of come into play and have the network effects and all this other stuff that are going to keep building it up.
Both great answers. It's unique for me because it's the first technology thing that my mom got me into. That was cool. And secondly, the actual reason why it is because the fact that Satoshi doesn't exist. That's fundamentally what makes Bitcoin different from every other project, except maybe Mimblewimble, is that there is no figurehead which can be approached, attacked, or otherwise attracted to non-purely greed-based incentives.
Satoshi's brilliance wasn't just in the species of money that he chose to plant. It was the season, the soil, and the gardening techniques that enabled Bitcoin to survive and thrive. his go-to-market strategy was brilliant. There was no other cryptocurrency that had Bitcoin's initial immaculate conception, and that I think is one of Bitcoin's most unique value props, is that no one had the expectation of profit when they first started to mine Bitcoin in 2009, 2010. And that is a really unique characteristic that not many people really think about, is that you can never replicate that, because now, with, we've got, Grin. With Grin mining, they wanted to have a fair launch. But with that fair launch, everyone had the expectation of profit. So everyone is buying ASICs in anticipation of that profit. So you can never really replicate Bitcoin's immaculate conception. And so that's what I think is really cool and unique about it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody. So a lot of interesting topics there, especially from economics, value proposition. So maybe my question to you to start off, Giacomo, is actually, what if we lose some of those? So as an example with Montepetris and DNS, he had to make a decision of a trade-off between privacy and adoptability and scalability. Do you think that the future of Bitcoin, potentially we may lose some of these unique properties that we love, such as privacy, in order for it to gain adoption?
So I think that if it completely lose some of these properties, for example, completely lose any privacy, then it's completely a failed project. Because without any privacy, I mean, the point we cannot have hard money in a centralized way is that governments took actions to forbid us from having that. You could just have e-gold in the 90s, which is a centralized server giving you digital asset to gold. So it's still hard money, less hard than Bitcoin, but it's still hard money, and it's digital, as Jimmy said, but it's not decentralized. So it just gets shut down. Gold was physical and decentralized, but it was very easy to confiscate because it was like big, bulky, and you cannot hide it, you cannot bring it across borders. So when Roosevelt wanted to just take people's gold, he just passed an act, and he could. With Bitcoin, the only reason it can succeed to be our money is just because the government is not effective into taking it off the hands of people. So privacy is not just a nice add-on to hard money. If money is not dark, it's not hard as well, because it will be forbidden from being and staying hard. If everybody knows that you are running a node, everybody can come to your home and coerce you into running a different node with a different monetary policy. The only reason the monetary policy is hard is because money is dark and has some privacy. Of course, there are degrees, like Bitcoin can be less private than now or more private than now, as I hope with Lightning and CoinJoin, Snore and everything. It can get better, it can get worse. The nice thing is that, for example, the internet was really centralized and was not conceived for privacy at the beginning. So during the commercialization in the 90s, the internet got way, way worse. But still, I think we cannot argue that the internet was not some kind of evolution toward like just a centralized newspaper and television. It's still pretty interesting to watch the struggle going on between censorship and freedom over the internet. So even if we lose something, it can still work, but it's better not to.
Yeah, there's a really strong tension here, because to some degree, you have you want privacy for the reasons that Giacomo said, but at the same time, you want that fixed limit. 21 million, to me at least, is very sacred, right? Like there's a reason why it's there, and we need it there. If we don't have it, it's a problem, right? Because the money's no longer hard. And there's a mathematical theorem that it's literally a theoretical limitation, which is that you can have perfectly binding, or the actual limit of how many coins there are, or you could have perfectly blinding. You have perfect privacy, right? So coins like Zcash, they traded in perfectly binding for perfectly blinding, at least in their shielded transactions. And as a result, when you have a bug like they did, then you can inflate the hell out of it, and that's a problem. Same thing with Monero. They had a similar bug which they patched, where they have perfectly blinding stuff, but it's not binding anymore, right? And that's the tension, is that to some degree, if it's not perfectly bound to the 21 million, then you don't have self-sovereignty. But at the same time, if you if you don't have perfect privacy, then you're somewhat bound to third parties that may try to come and take things away. So at least for me, the more important thing is the perfectly binding. You need a bound on the number of coins. And you need that hard monetary policy. Otherwise, it loses a lot of its monetary properties and the scarcity and the hardness and the low stock or very high stock to flow ratio and so on. Those are all things that you need from an economics perspective. From sort of a self-sovereignty perspective, privacy does matter, but also from a self-sovereignty perspective, the binding also matters. So that's an interesting tension, and I would say that I'm okay to some degree of not having perfect privacy in exchange for being guaranteed that bound.
Yeah, so my answer to this is no. Like, it wouldn't be the same system if you lose any of those characteristics. One of the kind of hydraulic tension that Jimmy's talking about there and Giacomo's talking about there would essentially cause the system to fail to meet the criteria it established upon its creation, which is that these are the conditions that make sound money. Assuming these conditions continue, it is sound money. If the conditions do not exist, it's not sound money. And the system is only interesting because of the sound money characteristics. Thus, no.
Yeah, there's a nuanced argument to be made between auditability and fungibility, or privacy and being able to validate that the 21 million Bitcoins exist and that there haven't been any more than the 21 million printed. So I largely agree with Jimmy here that the Bitcoin's value as a gold 2.0 is in that auditability of the monetary policy. And we would want privacy as well, but we shouldn't sacrifice that auditability in the long term for that incremental privacy utility. And some interesting ways to think about this as well. One is that dark market transactions still primarily use Bitcoin, even despite its privacy issues. So to me, that speaks to the network effect, that even with the network effect Bitcoin has, the idea that other coins have these features, like feature coins like Zcash, Monero, those are privacy feature coins. Even though that they have these, I would say superior privacy features, they still don't capture mind share and adoption because of that network effect. So, I think that Bitcoin has some really interesting things in the roadmap that will make it more private. So I think there will be there's a very nuanced argument. I think we're moving towards a nice middle ground where we'll have the best of both worlds.
Sacrificing my next answer to add something to this, because I think it's interesting. This is a very important point. In the black markets, people use online, of course. People use Bitcoin and not this fancy privacy coin mostly. Why is that? People think that privacy and fungibility are mostly a technical thing. Like if you create something that is some magical cryptography, then it's private, then it's fungible. But privacy and fungibility are social effects. So actually liquidity and network effective liquidity is as important, if not more important than technical stuff for a private or fungible asset. So if you are the only one using the most private shitcoin there, which is Zucco, of course, my shitcoin. So it's very private because basically nobody knows who has it. I don't even know if I have it because probably we didn't create it. So we don't really know. But if I'm the only one using that, even if the technology is magic, I'm super easy to detect and to spot. So you have to hide in the crowd to be private and fungible. And to hide in the crowd, you need to have a crowd. And to have a crowd, you need to have liquidity. So if you have Bitcoin and now you want to do a private transaction, so you move Bitcoin on the market to buy Monero, and then you send Monero, and then the receiver will have to send Monero to a market to buy Bitcoin. Sure, the Monero transaction itself was probably pretty private. That's not necessarily true because it depends on the anonymity set, on the ring signature, and the liquidity of the network itself. But also, you will lose privacy in the entering and in the exiting. So either Monero is itself a long-term store of value, so again, it's Bitcoin basically, or it will not really provide you that much as a privacy. So Monero probably is a fringe example because inside the very well-designed privacy strategy, Monero may play some confusing role. But for most of these privacy shitcoins, the point is that it's not the technology that matters. It's actually the liquidity that hides you in the crowd.
Can I add something? So what Giacomo is talking about is the anonymity set that you get to be in for any privacy thing. And the fact of the matter is most of these privacy coins have very tiny privacy anonymity sets. You essentially have a very small group within Zcash, for example, that use shielded transactions. And that's all you're hiding in. If you can identify the 40 people that are using Zcash shielded transactions, you pretty much know anytime that they do any shielded transaction, it's one of those 40 people. Similar thing with Monero. Monero community, I mean, despite all their shouting online, they're not that big, right? It's and you're not hiding in that many. And this is a very important point about being able to hide in a lot of things. You can have the perfect privacy technology, but if no one's using it, then you know kind of who it is once they use it, because it's like the 4 people that use it. Okay, it's one of those 4 people. There you go. Very easy.
Yeah. So this speaks to kind of the upper echelons of the fungibility conversation, which is that a sound money needs to meet some minimum threshold of fungibility such that it can be used or is comfortably used for a wide swath of commerce and general transaction sets. But at the upper end of those transaction sets, things like, and this is uncomfortable to say, but things like human trafficking, purchasing firearms, purchasing drugs, those kinds of things that are the tax evasion, that are at the top level of, a very, very sound money enables you to do those things a la cash without there being any kind of insight into it. Whether or not it's a requirement of a digital sound money or any sound money to actually have those characteristics is kind of an unknown conversation. It's like and if whether or not Bitcoin actually meets that fungibility threshold is ultimately subject to the liquidity set of people participating in similar kinds of transactions proper. It has to do with whether or not you're actually protected in performing those actions. Often has nothing to do with the type of money you're doing. It's whether or not someone's watching for the kind of activity itself.
And to kind of wrap up my thoughts on that, most people would consider fiat paper as the most liquid or the most fungible money out there. If you want to go do an illegal transaction, you're going to do it with a suitcase full of cash, right? Even with that, which is the most fungible money in existence, if you go deposit that at any institution of any meaningful size, even a small size, you could get flagged. So it's not necessarily that fungible because you're going to get flagged immediately when you use a very large portion of it. Or the merchant, some merchants don't even take $100 bills due to that same sort of money laundering concern. So even fiat cash, which is recognized as the most fungible currency in existence, that isn't actually that fungible when you look at the reality of trying to spend large sums of it.
Yeah, we've entered a world where wealth of any amount is now suspicious. Fantastic.
Well, so one more thing that I want to add to this whole thing is that privacy, in that sense, like the actual transacting, it's more a method of payment use case, right? Whereas the binding, the 21 million limit, that is much more a store of value thing. And I think for us as a community, store of value is way more important right now. And privacy does have its place, especially when you're doing transactions, especially on the things that are sort of gray or black market. But I mean, like making sure that the monetary policy is fixed, that requires some, that's the more important thing for me, and I think that's the one that we should focus on.
So at this point, I started the anarchy here, so I finished it. So yeah, so remember, first of all, liquidity is even more important than technology for privacy, and second, not every privacy techniques in Bitcoin requires sacrificing like the hard supply cap. Some do, like the fancy cryptographic stuff. They may be used for inflation bug and they may disguise inflation bugs. Some don't, like using Lightning is not compromising hard cap, and if done properly can increase privacy. Coin joining, coin swapping, it's not easy to do that now because of the wallets. Wallets are not ready for that, but it can be used. Bitcoin is fungible since day one at the transaction level, because there is no technical link from input to output. The only social link is that wallet developers, for obvious reasons, made so that when you spend inputs, the inputs are all yours, because doing otherwise is still difficult, requires coordination, and outputs are basically the payment and the change. But there are a lot of things that already with the protocol as it is at day one from Satoshi's client, you don't have to change anything to make every Bitcoin dirty and flagged. And we want every single Satoshi to be as dirty as we can.
All right, I'm going to move to Dan before more anarchy ensues. We all do love it, though. Thanks, Giacomo. All right, we're on the back of Hester Pierce's SEC Safe Harbor. I'm going to move to the best conversation of regulation, which is just what type of regulatory environment would you want to see for Bitcoin, for financial markets, and also to add to that, and how would the rest of the altcoin market, shitcoin market, fit into it? Would it be separate? How would you see wholesome environment?
I'm a libertarian, so I don't really believe in any sort of regulation. So I'd like none. You know, that would be my preferred regulatory environment. You know, I haven't delved too deeply into this topic. It's not something that I spend a lot of my time thinking about. I like to build systems that have permission. So I like to think in that sort of white space. You know, Bitcoin is, I think, very clearly defined by the different regulatory alphabet soup agencies in the US. It's somewhat of a property / commodity. I think Bitcoin and other crypto assets like Litecoin, and those are, I think, pretty clearly in that category of like a commodity. You know, the other coins like ICOs, I mean, it's basically, you know, Bitcoin's digital gold, and those are like twine and bark. It's like pieces of garbage you want to buy and speculate on. So, you know, I think a lot of those are illegal securities. I think that there's a lot of regulatory capture there. You've got very powerful VCs in Silicon Valley who have sat down with the SEC and had conversations that I'm sure were in the effect of, don't make us lose tons of money. This happens across all industries. A lot of regulatory capture occurs, and there's no doubt that these sort of conversations probably happened at some point in time. ICOs are, I think, pretty definitively securities. As I think Clayton said, I haven't seen an ICO that isn't a security. So I think ICOs are pretty clearly in that security category, but I'm not a regulatory expert, so this is just more of an opinion.
Yeah, so Bitcoin has the benefit and I guess the cost of, in the United States, it's now a money, a collectible, a commodity, a security, and an option, all at the same time, depending on which judge or jurisdiction or three-letter agency you ask. So it's all of those things and none of them at the same time. When it comes to ICOs, 100%. Majority, it has to do with regulatory capture, and the long arm of the law is going to end up kind of suppressing and increasingly enforcing Howey test-like constructs around those kinds of systems. Unfortunately, the biggest thing in the regulatory framework right now that's about to affect Bitcoin is the travel rule enforcement. And unlike Dan, I actually do spend way too much time following the regulations. But the travel rule is basically it's very straightforward. Anytime any amount of money over $3,000 moves between two financial institutions, and a financial institution is basically anything that has custody. So in a Bitcoin case, any one exchange that has keys that can sign on their behalf, that is secure money. Anytime that institution moves money from itself to another institution on your behalf, they're required with that transaction to include 10 characteristics. Sender's name, yes. Receiver's name, the financial institution's name, their address. The receiving financial institution's name, their address, the amount of money, and option amount. If you fail to do this in a transaction, the minimum fine is $5,000 per day per violation. 20% of Bitcoin transactions today go between financial institutions.
Well, with regard to regulation, I mean, I'm kind of like Dan. I really try not to pay attention, and I like permissionless systems for that reason. But the thing that really rankles me is that Bitcoin is treated the same as all of these shitcoins and ICOs, as if we're all in the same category. We're not. Bitcoin is decentralized. All those things have a central point of failure, and that's why they can. I mean, they should be a lot more scared than we are about regulatory issues. And this is constantly brought up in Silicon Valley and other places for that reason, because a lot of these VCs, they know that the companies that they're funding or the ICOs that they're funding or whatever, they have strong central points of failure that if regulated, they're going to go bust, or they're going to lose money or something like that. There was a stablecoin project called Basis that collected a ton of money from Silicon Valley VCs. And they ended up just giving all the money back because the regulatory environment was just so sucky. They knew that they had a central point of failure and that they wouldn't survive it. And this is the folly of all of these ICOs and things. You're basically trying to create money without the state's permission in a centralized way. This is what brought down Eagle. This is what brought down a lot of these previous things. And I think the same fate awaits them. The nice thing about Bitcoin is that it's actually decentralized. And that means that they can't just go shut somebody down. There's no door to knock on and say, hey, you guys, we need you to change Bitcoin. We need more paperwork done every time you do a transaction.
I never understood the profit motive behind stablecoins. Like, why? Like, how is a business supposed to make money when its entire context is remaining the same value?
Well, so they were an algorithmic stablecoin, and based on demand, people would get paid out or something like that. That's why
even more of a disaster.
Well, that's why it would have been classified as a security. So that's why.
Oh, so, I mean, can't we ask Craig Wright though to change Bitcoin's code?
Well, if they knock on his door, I wouldn't be sad.
So I'm a libertarian as well. I mean, I just try to be logically consistent, and you cannot be logically consistent if you are a statist. So I'm against political violent censorship, and I hope that doesn't happen, of course. I hope that everybody's nice and nobody go to beat up other people in order to steal their stuff or to hurt them. So statism and regulation. Also, Bitcoin is already regulated enough by math. So Bitcoin has, I mean, we were talking about cap of 21 millions. That's regulation. Bitcoin is already regulated, and that's it. And we don't need any other regulation. But if this kind of violent political censorship, which fancy kids like to call regulation, must happen, I have a little bit of mixed feelings, because probably I really hope that this happen sooner than later, because one of the failure mode that I can see is actually, you know, that the Mao strategy, instead of just jailing dissidents in China, you leave them free for a few years, and then you sign names. So they get weak, they get soft, they get spoiled. They don't think adversarially, and they don't prepare for adversarial situation because they think it's fine, and then you just hit them at the end, and you just kill everybody which name you just signed. So this situation may be worse than just having. I mean, we created Bitcoin to survive to government censorship about and monopoly about money. If the government doesn't really get serious soon, we may get soft, and that's also one of the reasons we have centralized shitcoins. The reason we have those is that the government is slow, inefficient, inconsistent, not constant, not homogeneous. So we may start to think we really don't need those difficult, hard characteristics that would make Bitcoin resilient. So in a way, I hope that evil people will not just aggress other people with aggressive violence. But if they have to do that, and I think they will do that eventually, it will not be bad in a way to have that sooner than later.
A lot of people look at Bitcoin's security model and they wonder if that's too much cost, or a level of security that is over the top. But I think, how many people here have heard of Fermi's paradox, which is essentially like a calculation of a bunch of different assumptions that you plug in to come up with how much intelligent life should live in the universe. The thing is, even if you plug in any sort of variables there, we don't see any energy displacement across the universe that would signal that there is a, Star Wars-esque style civilization. There's no giant spaceships, there's nothing. And so, there's people hypothesize, why don't we see anything out there? And there's a hypothesis that there's a great filter event where all advanced civilizations die after a certain moment. And I think with cryptocurrencies, almost all of these shitcoins will die at that moment when states actually start to care. Right now they exist for a long time and they have terrible security and they're centralized. But that moment that states start to care, that's when they start to pop. And I think that's a future, event in the future that will happen.
Fermi coin.
Fermi coin, yes. You can buy the pre-sale now.
Giacomo, what do you think people misunderstand about Bitcoin most, and potentially where do you think that misunderstanding comes from?
A lot of stuff. Basically, there are a lot of misconceptions about Bitcoin. Mostly that some characteristics, some features that you like, you can get those alone and without the others. So again, I want complete privacy, so I can just give up hardness of money supply because whatever. But that's not true, because when you have a soft, easy money that completely replaced by hard money, even if you have privacy, nobody uses that, and so you don't have privacy, which is the example of before. And the other way around. I just want hard money. I don't like privacy. Please KYC us all and AML me completely. I'm fine. Oh, if that's the case, you didn't need Bitcoin at all. You could just use like gold in the last century, because if you are not adversarial, you don't need Bitcoin. So you cannot have one characteristic without the other, and that applies to many characteristics in Bitcoin. And the second misconception is basically that every feature and characteristic that you have, you can just increase it for free without any trade-off. I mean, not only you need all of those in order to, as Johny said, you need all of those at least to a certain threshold in order for the whole mechanism to work, but mostly when you try to have too much of one, you will lose some of the others. So perfectly binding versus perfectly hiding, or scalability versus auditability, because nobody runs nodes anymore if you have many transactions. So there are a lot of trade-offs there, and it's not like people that doesn't really understand, that doesn't really try to replicate the Bitcoin experiment in their mind. They may think that you can just move you can just move, just press a button like, I want more of this, more of this. Actually, anything comes with very, very serious trade-offs. And that's something that people is not, easy consumer technology doesn't really make you think about trade-offs. Like everything can be easy, just give me the easy path. But the easy path comes with some serious trade-off, and you have to think about that.
Hey, the biggest misconception for me is, I have a couple. So the first one is decentralization. There's this sort of sense, especially by a lot of altcoiners and people that are creating these projects, that decentralization is just like a feature that you can add to the system. And this is definitely not true, right? As soon as you have somebody or a company or any funding entity that tries to make these, you realize right away it's centralized, right? They're the ones that are creating the software. They're the ones that are making the thing. They're designing everything. That's the biggest one. People think it's like a feature that you can pluck off the feature tree and just put into your product. You can't do it. In fact, in the digital realm, Bitcoin is like the only coin that's managed to get there, and we're not really even sure how it did, right? To some degree, it had something to do with its immaculate conception, the fact that Satoshi disappeared in 2010, and a bunch of other things. But we're not, like, the fact that we don't really understand it is like just sort of beyond a lot of people that are very arrogant to think that they can just add it to their platform. The other one that really annoys me, and it's a giant misconception, is that especially in Silicon Valley, a lot of people think of Bitcoin as a technology, right? As if, I don't know how many times I've heard the phrase, my coin is the Facebook to Bitcoin's MySpace, or something like that. And the thing being like, oh, it's a technology. If you just iterate it or add one more feature, it's so much better. And this leads back to the previous one. Decentralization is not a feature you can just put into your product, right? You can have 5-second blocks or 1-second blocks or TPS of 1 billion or whatever. None of that matters because it's not decentralized. The most important emergent feature out of Bitcoin is that decentralization. It's the fact that you have self-sovereignty over your own money. And if you can't add that, well, then your project's kind of a useless fiat shitcoin. And that's essentially what most of these, well, actually all of them have created, all the altcoiners. So it's not a technology, it's a money, right? And you can't just, quote unquote, improve it by like tweaking one feature. I mean, this is what started the whole altcoin movement back in 2011 when, you know, essentially the only one to emerge out of it was Charlie Lee with Litecoin. And all he did was change the proof of work algorithm to script and change the block time to 2.5 minutes instead of 10. And like he thought, well, those two are better. Those two are better. Therefore, you know, it's a better money. And that was the argument for all of those Litecoin advocates.
It's faster.
Yeah, it's faster, and you know, we like, and it's a ridiculous argument because you're not getting the most important property, which is it's decentralized. Bitcoin is decentralized.
The funny thing is the 2.5 minute block times ends up it actually ends up being a bit of an attack vector if you dive into how selfish mining and other mining attacks end up working, which is kind of funny. I think we're remiss. I mean, I agree with the political philosophies to some extent of the lack of the need for lack of violence and lack of force against those who are choosing to kind of seize their own destiny, to be self-sovereign when it comes to their own money. But being realistic about it too is the United States government, thanks to the Patriot Act, can operate with impunity anywhere in the entire world. They can extract a person basically from anywhere in the entire world for breaking a law, except for the Cripsy guy who's happily living in Western China somewhere. So the extent to which you have to be realistic about the characteristics of your system and how well it can hold up against the might of that institution, which is literally the United States Treasury. You have to be very realistic about it, and I would say the majority, if not all, of the Silicon Valley-based initiatives in this space really discount that because they're used to a conversation where they're able to drive the language and context of the regulations themselves, thanks to some degree of the capture that they've had over the years. But those contexts can change on a dime, and if you've been following the way that this current administration does things, that dime can flip real quickly.
So I've got two misconceptions that I'll cover, but I want to touch on the Silicon Valley aspect because I've been living in San Francisco for the last 7 years and have been a member of the Bitcoin community there since January 13. Silicon Valley, you know, engineers are largely worshipped in Silicon Valley, and they're very much tinkerers. They want to go tinker with stuff. And so when they found Bitcoin, they're like, oh, what if I could just tinker with it? Like, what if I changed block time or 210 million hard cap or whatever you'd like? And so I think Silicon Valley, you know, there's that temptation to tinker with something that's just so irresistible that they can't handle not doing that. You know, it's just irresistible for them to do. The two biggest misconceptions I'd like to cover, one is that, you know, salt baying blockchain on something doesn't make it valuable. You know, you can't just sprinkle blockchain on it and then it's immediately awesome. You know, blockchains suck. They're really, really bad at almost everything. Bitcoin, you know, blockchain was built to build Bitcoin. That's it. I mean, to believe that either Satoshi had no idea what he was doing with blockchain technology is ridiculous. The idea that he just kind of like randomly shit out Bitcoin as the first application is just beyond absurd. And if you look at the trade-offs that blockchains make, it's pretty obvious that like a sound money is basically one of the only things you can do with it. And the second is, you know, peer-to-peer cash. Oh, the Bcashers, they love that. They love that term. You know, that you see Roger consistently highlighting peer-to-peer cash and tweeting it almost every day. Okay, so cash in the context of the white paper is a reference to, you know, Adam Beck, who's in the crowd. You got Hashcash, eCash. These are references to payment finality and some measure of privacy. It is not referring to cash in your pocket. That is not at all what Satoshi referenced in the white paper, and then is not at all what he wrote the white paper and published it in the cryptographer email list. You know, and these are cypherpunks. So it's largely a marketing paper to a group of individuals. So he wanted to craft copy that resonated with them, and that's why he uses the word cash. But I feel like that is one of the biggest misinterpretations in the space.
let me just double down a little bit on this. It's incredible. This is one of the misconceptions that really triggers me because, I mean, think about cash, even physical cash in your pocket. So if you try to send money with PayPal across a border, that's not cash at all, and it's very cheap and fast to transmit over distance. If you try to put cash, physical cash, into an envelope or a box and to ship it, that's cash, way more cash than PayPal. That's the definition of cash, and it's slow and expensive to send. So cash doesn't mean cheap and fast to move at distance. Cash happens to be cheap and fast to move when you are in the same room, which is basically never the case for commerce. So basically, cash is not cheap and fast. Cash is slow and expensive to move, but with some other features, mostly privacy. I want to be paid in cash because I want to go dark, and zero or reduced collateral risk, so reduced counterparty risk. So I want to be paid cash because I don't want to have debt or credit because I don't want counterparty risk. That's cash, not cheap and fast to move. Sorry.
Yeah. The other thing about, if you read the first page of the white paper, it's very clear what Satoshi meant by cash is lack of a third-party intermediary. Lack of a third-party intermediary. It wasn't about being able to send quickly or anything like that. It was about the fact that there's no financial institution in the middle, like Visa or PayPal or any of those. That was what he was fighting against. And it's kind of crazy right now because at least in Bitcoin Cash, what's going on is that they're about to have a split over the infrastructure funding proposal. And part of that is because there's a third-party intermediary. They basically put the miners in charge of everything, and surprise, surprise, the miners are telling them what to do, and they don't like it, right? Like there's a whole, they're realizing, oh, is this what we signed up for? We said the miners are in charge and that no one needs to run a node. Now the narrative's all changing. They're like, oh, I guess we need to run nodes because otherwise we won't know which chain we're on and all this other stuff. So, that whole narrative is just ridiculous. Cash is about lack of third-party intermediary, and it's the ability to do a transaction without one.
Thanks, Jimmy. Okay. Giacomo, speaking of running a node, did you want to say anything on that one? Okay. I learned from you in your workshop how to run a Bitcoin node and a Lightning node. So my question then is regarding unique properties and new technologies. It doesn't need to be Lightning specific, but I'll ask you Lightning specific. What would you like to see Bitcoin grow with all the latest developments? What most excites you, I should say, about the latest developments, and why? Why is it that, Lightning is so excited to you, various developments are so exciting to you regarding Bitcoin's value propositions?
So first of all, if you learn how to run a node during my workshop, we have failed because the purpose was to shock you and to really depress you and to show you how difficult it is to run a full node in a proper way without trusting a counterparty. Because now, there was a lot of narrative about run your node during the New York Agreement attack and stuff like that. So everybody was telling everybody run your node. But then if people just start to buy a box by somebody or by a centralized company and plug it, okay, they're running their node, but still you have a central point of failure just as much serious as the miners. So the point is that you should do that in a way that is auditable, that it's not really dependent of a single source of trust, and that's where it becomes really, really difficult. And the purpose was to show people how damn difficult it is. So now you can do the easy thing, but you must know how hard it is and how many assumptions you're doing. Things I'm excited about are, in general, I think that the things that really excite me about the new development is layerization, because the big trade-off and the paradox that you have is that in order to make Bitcoin resilient and anti-fragile, you have to be able to make it better over time. But if you change Bitcoin too much, that's basically violates the main feature of Bitcoin, which is stability, reliability, auditability in the long term, status quo preservation. So you want Bitcoin to be hard not only to produce but also to change, but then you want to change stuff to make it better. Layerization is a thing that can really win. You still have trade-offs, but you can now play with trade-offs on different layers, and that's way better. So you can keep the base layer very, very strong on one extreme of the trade-off, and then you can move the other layer on another extreme of the trade-off. So you can have the base layer like very, very resilient, and the upper layer can be very, very exciting, very, very vibrant of new changes. And you can have like a lot of auditability at the base layer, and you can have a lot of privacy and fungibility at the second layer, for example, with Lightning, or the great stuff which is signature aggregation. So the great stuff that can come later is that right now we cannot aggregate signature, but with an eventual possible Schnorr soft fork, you can aggregate signature, which means that a lot of stuff can actually happen outside Bitcoin. And then the only thing that Bitcoin network sees is just one signature, which hides a lot of external complexity. So that's great. Layerization is a great thing.
Yeah, so the things that make Bitcoin unique, the big one is the hard money aspect, right? And with regard to that, if you care about hard money, then you care very much about the security around your Bitcoin. So the things that enhance the security of your Bitcoins, and part of that is privacy, obviously, being able to hide whatever it is that you're doing. Taproot, I think, gets us at least a large part of the way there. You can't tell by an address whether it's pay to pub key hash or pay to script hash, or you have no idea under what conditions you're going to be able to spend it. So that's, and you might have several paths and you spend on one of them. So that level of security or the ability to hide, that I think is that's for me the most important part. I like Lightning, I like the technology and all that, but for me that's a little bit more later. Although with Strike and Escher and these apps that allow you to receive payment in fiat, but you get paid in Bitcoin, that's exciting because that's a store of value technology, right? At that point, it becomes something where I go and sell my wares and whatever goods or services I have, I'm able to receive in either one, and immediately I get in Bitcoin. That accumulates Bitcoin for me. That enhances the network effect of scarcity instead of like buying a Dell computer with Bitcoin and then they just go and sell the Bitcoin. That's essentially me selling Bitcoin. This way, it's more about me buying Bitcoin, and having security around that, allowing for that sort of use case. Those are the things I'm excited about.
Yeah, for me, it's the continued kind of sound stewardship of Bitcoin Core proper, which we should thank our lucky stars. We have such moral stewards for the protocol. It's also that with AgSigs, Schnorr signatures, and Graphroot or Taproot, whichever ends up being adopted, hopefully, who knows, maybe we'll never be able to soft fork ever again, and that ends up speaking to the hardness of the protocol itself, which would be great. So either or is great. We're definitely trending towards a world where making significant changes to Bitcoin is getting increasingly more difficult, which is great. It's a very good thing. It's very counterintuitive. It's very counter to the Silicon Valley methodology of move fast and break things, whereas Bitcoin is more like move ever slower till we literally don't do anything. Which is great, but the most exciting long, like medium term kind of improvement will be what I call simultaneous open and close, which is once you have these signature coordination capabilities that come as a result of Taproot, aggregated signatures, and Schnorr. We can do them right now. It's just very kludgy, but once we have the more sophisticated methods, we can do them more easily. It enables us to coordinate actions amongst ourselves as we enter and exit the Lightning Network, and that blows up the search graph for chain analytics firms or what have you, corporate actors, nation-state actors who are evaluating the network's topology. It blows up their search space beyond them being able to realistically, accurately taint coins for whatever activity of commerce they may have been used in or not used in. And in the long run, the participation of governments and corporate actors in the Lightning Network as nodes facilitating payments is it like this is a success condition for Bitcoin, because in the long run with the Lightning Network, in order to surveil the Lightning Network accurately, you must have funds in the Lightning Network. So if regulators are required to hold Bitcoin in order to monitor the status of the network, we have totally won.
So I think we've had enough geeking out on the core protocol stuff. I'm, my background's in products and marketing, so I think the marketing aspect of Bitcoin has never been better. I mean, back when we were all into it earlier days, Bitcoin marketing was terrible. It was Bitcoin Talk or Our Bitcoin, and then it moved to Twitter. But we've got great content creators. We've got videos, podcasts. We have conferences that are Bitcoin only like this. I mean, this is a dream, I think, for propagating Bitcoin's narrative, having really great content. Not everyone is as technical as we are. And I think a lot of people have done a good job of condensing and compressing that narrative to make it easy to understand. And I think that's something to where we're going to see it continually compress and become easier and easier, to where I know we've all had the conversation with our family and friends trying to get them into Bitcoin. It's always very tough. But eventually there'll be some content that comes out that's going to be so easy that you might actually convert someone based on just one Medium article or one video. So I'm super thrilled to see that continually progress.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, gentlemen. And I am opening it up to Q&A, and it looks like we have our first question right here.
My question actually has two parts. Going back to the fungibility and the whole privacy issue, and using coin joins. When people are using them, is the object to hide the person or the coin? And then the second part is, if we're getting to a point where you're worried about the Satoshis, like you said, dirty Satoshis, if you're selling T-shirts, do you have to be worried that every purchase or every time I sell a T-shirt that I accept on the Lightning Network or I accept Bitcoin for it, that it would be, what you're calling a dirty Satoshi? So there's two questions in one, I guess.
I'd like to take the second instead of explaining how CoinJoin works.
Yeah, I can take the first one. So the purpose of a coin join is to make it so that the outputs of the coin join are indistinguishable from all of the participants in the coin join. It's why if everyone participates in a coin join for the same value, and then we all have outputs that are the same value, now we can't know who, an observing party can't know who any of the instantiating parties' resulting addresses are. It's why simultaneous opens and close that involve Lightning are so interesting, is because now we can have higher order coordination events amongst groups, where we can say, all right, so here's a time of day, 100 of us are all going to open a Lightning, we're going to all participate in an aggregated signature event, where we all, for the same amount of Bitcoin, all open like the exact same size Lightning Network kind of capacity channels, and in the future, we will all simultaneously close our channels to new addresses for the same amount, or slightly a smaller amount in the event that there's any payments that actually occur on Lightning. And as a result, you've now added CoinJoin to the kind of myriad ways you can move coins throughout the Lightning Network, and then the output itself is also another CoinJoin.
About dirty Satoshis and clean Satoshis or KYC Satoshis. The point about KYC is not just that it's a threat to Bitcoin. If you whitelist Bitcoins and you blacklist Bitcoin, you break monetary fungibility. And it's not just like ethical because privacy is important and because freedom is important. The promotion of ubiquitous KYC it's economic illiteracy. So think about what money is. What money is a tool that allows the merchant to finally not know his customer. If you know your customer, you can exchange your product and service for other products and services and just trust him. You can. You don't need to know your customer. When you go to any kind of shop, you as a customer, you need to know the shop because you cannot verify the product or the service beforehand. So you need to trust the merchant. But the merchant uses money instead of barter because so that he can avoid trusting the customer or knowing the customer at all. The reason we use money to scale trust outside the circle of knowing your customer. So if you need to know your customer, you cannot trade. The reason that people think that now there is a KYC regulation that doesn't destroy trade is that it is not really true. what we have now, it's a monopoly, as Saifeddin explained. Banks have a monopoly on money laundering. So basically, when you receive money, you have to just know that it comes from a bank, and so banks will just spare you legally from having to know where it was before and before and before. And with cash, there is a regulation that said that when you receive like fiat cash, you don't have to know where the cash was before. The fact that exchanges are now promoting the narrative that you can and you should and you would have to reconstruct the history of the money you are receiving is just complete economic illiteracy. Any system where you are required to know your customer for real without the money laundering banking system, then it's a system that cannot work for trade because trust doesn't scale that way. You cannot be supposed to know your customers and do trading. You should not know your customers.
Wait, do we have time for one last question or no?
Yeah, so one final question would be probably for Johny. You mentioned Lightning Network and Taproot being able to really obfuscate all of the chain analysis and stuff. Could you maybe, without going into too much technical detail, explain a little bit how this next upgrade combined with Lightning can really mess up the chain analysis type of analytics, and how realistic do you think that is happening and getting widespread support within the next 3 to 5 years?
It just enables strong proofs of coordination. And when you have those that can occur as a result when they're nested in the chain, it means you can take off the burden from application and product developers from having to build those harnesses themselves.
Yeah, the other one I think that's going to be really interesting in that regard is cross-input signature aggregation. That's probably not for Taproot. So Taproot doesn't include that, although it's mentioned in the BIP. But probably SegWit v2 will get something like cross-input signature aggregation. And what that means is, right now, if you have 10 inputs, you have to have at least 10 signatures. Or if it's multi-sig, it might be a lot more signatures. With Taproot, each input only really needs one signature, which is kind of nice because all Schnorr signatures can be aggregated per input. But if you have cross-input signatures, all 10 can have one signature. Now it becomes logical and economically rational to do coin joins, because if you join a coin join, you have to pay less. You pay less fees. So once you get to that point, then like it's open season, right? Like every company is going to argue, okay, well, we're paying out all of these customers, but we're using industry best practice. We have to go join this large pool of coin joins because that's best for our bottom line and so on. And you know, like if we have a good fee market around that time, that's a huge incentive for everybody to sort of mix their coins together. And that and you know, I think Lightning Labs, one of their big projects or one of their paths to revenue is doing submarine swaps with a lot of Lightning channels. So right now, if you want to refill your Lightning capacity, you have to do a submarine swap, and that's a single transaction on the network. What they can do is basically have like multiple Lightning channels be filled with the same atomic swap. So at that point, it's like, well, you closed your channel, or I mean, you're refilling your channel, but you have no idea which of these it is. And it's like better for the blockchain because you're getting there's less block space being used for these submarine swaps. So yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Okay. Do you think quantum computing is a threat to Bitcoin now, in 10 years, in 50 years?
No.
Okay.
No.
So quantum computing is cool because you can do like interesting physical simulation, and quantum supremacy was a cool thing because you can do stuff with physical simulation. The problem with quantum computing with regard with cryptography is that to go to the level to break something like breaking a CDSA, you need thousands of logical error-corrected qubits, and each error-corrected qubits means thousands of physical qubits together in a way that we don't even know if it's physically possible. So we are at the level. The question right now is. We are basically in the Alexandria Bibliothèque in 300 before Christ, and we see some steam engine, and we ask, is it possible to make space travel? So theoretically, yes, if you study Archimedes, like, you study some rules, theoretically it is possible. We may go there, but we don't even know if it's actually practical in our physical universe. So this is not like like a low Moore. It's not like computers. We have the chip. We think we can just make it smaller and more cool and do cooler stuff. It's not like that. It's something like, is it possible that we have a self-replicating biological computer doing mining instead of ASICs? Yeah, it's possible. Is it possible that we have like an asteroid, like a meteor rain destroying each single mining farm? Yeah, that's a threat to Bitcoin. That's not impossible. But you have to make. Let's give the right priority to things. Like ACDSA breaking logical qubits is probably less a threat right now than biological self-replicating biominers.
Yeah, I've said this before, but this is exactly like cold fusion or like flying cars or something like that. It's something that the media narrative has sort of like centered on because it just sounds really cool. Quantum computing, do you know anything about that? And a lot of people like to sound smart by mentioning quantum computing in that context. If you actually study quantum computing, you realize like the engineering challenges are enormous. Like they're on the level of cold fusion, right? Like you have to lower the temperature of these atoms to like nano degrees above absolute zero and keep them there for an extended amount of time. And like they're super slow, they take a long time to do, and it's only because of that media narrative that companies have like essentially invested in a lot of it. There's no real practical use for quantum computing yet. At some point maybe you find something, but like a lot of other technologies that are like more mundane that actually change your life, like having wheels on your suitcase or something like that, to take an example from Nassim Taleb, those are much more likely to disrupt something in Bitcoin than something like quantum computing.
There are practical uses, but like protein folding, physical simulation, those are stuff. The problem is that everybody knew that you could do that with quantum computing, but nobody cared until you have some kind of scare about ACDSA and cryptography. Now everybody's excited. The point is that the realistic things are not so excited. You can study protein folding and maybe cure AIDS, which is, not so exciting.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Because I'm going to have you end on something more positive than we won't be able to cure AIDS because the computer's not going to work. So what will we be able to do tomorrow from what we're here creating today? I want to hear some positivity.
Protect your own money.
Well, being self-sovereign is the big one. Right? Like that's the major thing that I think we can all look forward to. Instead of a nanny state that like controls everything that we do, we can have control over our money. We can be more self-sovereign, and we can get rid of the ills of the fiat standard, which obviously Safety spoke about right before this.
Bitcoin gives us the chance to be free, truly free. Money isn't just numbers. It's not this piece of paper you get or this digital thing. It is your time and energy that you spent to earn it. Your lifetime savings is your aggregate lifetime compressed into that value. The preservation of that value and the freedom to transact or store it however you would like is truly a humanitarian sort of issue. It's a fundamental human right. And so that's why I love Bitcoin. I think it is once people go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and find that, once you go into Bitcoin, you really start to question the nature of your reality, your government, religion, money. And once you go down that rabbit hole, you truly begin this kind of hero's journey to understand freedom and why you are a sovereign individual and why you deserve that.
What can you do tomorrow which is positive? Buy Zuck's box, my shitcoin. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you.